there is a real rift between Netanyahu and Trump, and said quite openly that Trump just finds Netanyahu very arrogant, and resents his Netanyahu's attempts to manipulate him in U.S. policy. Now, this is a constant. I think actually probably all previous presidents, over the last 25 years or so, have found Netanyahu to be very annoying. In fact, there was a famous hot mic incident during Obama's presidency where Obama and Sarkozy, the French president, were heard discussing Netanyahu between themselves. And they said, yeah, I just can't stand the guy. He's just such an arrogant asshole. And the other one says, yeah, really, so it's a well-known fact. And I think it was maybe a couple of months ago that actually, I said that, okay, clearly Trump has shown himself by both word and deed to be a very firm, in fact, a zealous supporter of Zionism in his first term, and I think overall in this term as well. And you look at his appointments, everything. So let's, first admit this. But then Trump has his personality, which is unlike the personality, I think, of any previous president. I mean, he's an open book, and he if he doesn't like somebody, he can't hide it. We've already seen it with Zelensky, right? And I think, yeah, it's clear that he's not unlike these previous presidents who, agreed with him that Netanyahu was arrogant and just a very unpleasant person to deal with. They felt like it was part of their duty as president, to support the policy and just to be quiet about it and pretend to be on friendly terms with Netanyahu. But Trump's just not that kind of person. Yeah, he's the Zionist and everything, but he just can't stand the guy, and he's just not going to hide it. And, he reacts kind of more at a very visceral, emotional level. And I think he's incapable of maintaining a facade, over a long period of time. Maybe he can pull it off on occasion. So I'm not surprised that this happened, actually. I mean, I think I always saw the potential for this. And I think we even spoke about it in a very, very recent program that there does, we could see a personality conflict between the two of them. Now, the big question is whether or not this personality conflict will have real repercussions for policy, for U.S. support for Israel. And I think there's always a chance of that. I think you're right. I mean, it could blow up into something bigger. We'll just see how far Trump goes with this. Now, it's just, again, we've had encouraging signs from Trump with regard to Palestine in the past. And if maybe you recall the Jeffrey Sachs video that he posted, that was very critical of Netanyahu. But then we saw this really, and then there was a ceasefire. There was reasons to be hopeful. But then the ceasefire was broken by the Israelis, but clearly with the blessing of the U.S. There's no question about it. And then you had this full-throated support for Netanyahu's plans for his, essentially ethnic cleansing, open support for ethnic cleansing, and even encouragement. We all remember the real estate deal talk from Trump. So I don't know, because we have seen we've seen him flip-flop, and there were reports about friction between him and Netanyahu even prior to the inauguration. And then it just seems to have maybe flared up, and maybe it's become even more serious than it was in the past. And maybe this time that there will be a permanent change. But we have seen the rift healed, and U.S. support for Israel to actually solidify. So I don't know. Again, it's just like, it's really, I think, a mistake to, or it's kind of a fool's errand to make any sort of firm prediction about what Trump was going to do. I think it's real that he is very angry at Netanyahu, and he has, again, we got this deal with the Houthis, which appears to be something that the Israelis, it surprised them, and they're upset about it. And maybe he'll go from there and continue to ignore the Israelis. Maybe he'll conclude a deal with Iran. maybe we'll really, see a change of course. That's certainly possible. I mean, this personality conflict can feed into a real change of course, but I lack the confidence because, again, of what I've seen of Trump in the past, he just might be persuaded again. Let's not forget that he's surrounded by these all these ultra-Zionists that he himself picked, and they may persuade him, say, yeah, we hate Netanyahu, but we got to do this,
Yeah, I think we should watch the Iran negotiations closely and see how those pan out. I think that will tell us if this rift is really real. But something that really has worried me until I heard this news just the other night is that the Iran negotiations, they started off with Witkoff saying that they were going great and, it sounded encouraging. We were both optimistic. But then they come back again for the second or third meeting, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, no, we're playing hardball. Complete dismantlement of your nuclear program. No enrichment at all. No civilian nuclear program, which they're entitled to under international law as a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Complete disarmament of your conventional weapon systems. No more missiles. All these things that all of a sudden are clearly deal breakers for Iran. And then you wonder, well, where did this come from? Because you hear from what we heard that's being leaked, if it's true, is that Trump was upset that Netanyahu is pushing him towards war with Iran. Well, if he's pushing him towards war with Iran, why is Trump's negotiating team playing hardball like this, putting these ridiculous demands that give Trump either two paths, either war with Iran because they cannot accept this deal, or that Trump has to back down and look weak. It doesn't make any sense. Why did this happen? Unless it was Netanyahu that was running the negotiations more than Trump was, and maybe Trump figured that out, and that's why another reason he's so pissed. Yeah. The Iran negotiations don't make any sense to me. Why would Trump put himself in that position where either he has to look like a fool for backing down from these really ridiculous demands, or he's pushing for war? That's, to me, those are the only two outcomes, right?
Right. Yeah, no, they're clearly, it's contradictory signals. And as is the case with the Ukraine war, incoherence. And I think just outright incompetence. I think you laid it out very, very well. Again, just I'll just maybe just add that within Israel, seems to be a belief and a fear that Trump does want to deal with Iran. He does want to conclude a deal with Iran, and that he's going to get it. So there are those kind of rumors and beliefs, but then we are seeing the opposite evidence as well. And I don't know. It just seems like, again, as many people have pointed out, I think it's just that he runs a divided administration, and that he himself is just rather inconsistent and tends to flip flop, and I don't know. It's just one day you get an encouraging signal, and then the next you get a very discouraging one, and I don't know where we're going with this now.
Yeah, it gives people whiplash trying to figure out what's going on with Trump. Just this inconsistency from Trump, does this just make the United States look ridiculous in the eyes of the world? Because we just have this sort of stream of consciousness coming from Trump, and it's chaos. Just like, whoa, what's that? What? And then whoa, every day it's just changing.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, it drives everybody insane. It drives us insane trying to figure out what is this man doing, and he's in charge of supposedly the most powerful country in the world. How do you interact with that? And people are just, is the process now just to stay clear of the U.S. because you can't deal with them because you don't know what's going to happen. They change their mind every other minute.
Yeah, well, it certainly does harm. You want to have a reputation as a straight dealer, and as a country that keeps its promises. Let it be remembered that we actually that reputation was damaged by previous administrations. It's not just Trump. We have, again, we have made promises that we failed to keep, going all the way back to, for example, the promise not to expand NATO eastward. And we've done it again and again. And these were all previous, kind of presidential, truly presidential, like presidents, if I could use that term, unlike Trump, no stream of consciousness. But we had already really kind of created the impression, or, much more than the impression, the firm belief among, for example, the Russians and much of the world that we are not, that our government is not to be trusted. It doesn't keep its promises. So that was already there. But now, there's just a whole other level of just incompetence and incoherence and just outright looniness, everything from the tariffs to Greenland to, just to give you, this is just one very small example. What was it the other day that Trump declared there was going to be 100% tariff on foreign films? And that lasted for a day, because I think immediately it was like the people in Hollywood called and said, hey, that's not going to work, because for these various reasons, like our companies do a lot of filming overseas, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is, so, that's just one thing. He just says things without doing the research, without understanding. He doesn't consult with experts and then come to a considered conclusion. I think everybody knows that now. Even a lot of the people who were really worked hard to believe in Trump. I think really for good reasons they wanted to believe in him, but it's just clear that he is incompetent, and the whole world sees him. That makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to go forward with negotiations. Trust is already, which had been damaged by previous administrations, is just, has been further diminished under Trump. So how can you make deals? Yeah. And if this wonderful method of, bluster and threats. Well, like I've said, the more you do it, the less effective that becomes. Everybody sees that you make a threat and then you walk it down, walk it back. It has severely, damaged our negotiating positions with regard to all kinds of things, everything from tariffs to the nuclear deal with Iran.
So will that just equate to further isolation for the United States? People just say, well, we can't do business with you because, you're too inconsistent.
Yeah. I think, people will be careful, like the Russian leadership, to not to say that outright. I think that's what they're, again, saying behind closed doors. But I think that's a conclusion that's being reached in governments all around the world. They just say, okay, yeah, try to do what you can maybe to butter up the guy, but just understand that what he says today is going to be contradicted a week from now, and don't take any of it seriously. Let's just see what happens when after the Trump storm passes. But I think whatever happens, whoever comes into power, this term will have really greatly damaged the reputation of the U.S. and that damage is going to be long term. I mean, it was just like the sense that, again, that the U.S. is just this firm, this rock, this solid sanctuary for the dollar and for, in all kinds of spheres, is gone. And I don't think you can bring it back, probably not in our lifetime.
Maybe if Trump is just erratic enough, and like I said, he has that stream of consciousness and he's just really pissed off, he'll just let it all out. And then all of a sudden, all through Twitter and social media, people will start to say like, whoa, wait a second, Israel isn't our friend. These things start to come out about all these things that Israel has done, try to push us into war. Maybe people are talking about the USS Liberty more. All these things, the Epstein situation, this Mossad CIA tie, that these are essentially working together to control the government in the world.
Well, that may be a little bit of an overstatement there, but everything else I would agree with. But anyway, well, I think I've said, at least on a couple of occasions previously, is that Trump, though he has, again, so far proven him to be a great friend of Zionism, is also potentially could be the one that could really damage Zionism like no other president has. And it's a little bit of like the Nixon going to China, because he has those creds, those Zionist creds. It's he can get away with, for example, get away with, open condemnation of Netanyahu in a way that no previous president could. I think Biden hated Netanyahu, Obama hated Netanyahu, but they never could let that be known. But Trump, basically because of who he is, may express it and may also get away with it. And that could, like you say, could just kind of open a window that has been shut for decades. And a lot of people who would not look at this possibility, that Zionism is not our friend and is actually is not something that's, a noble part of Western civilization, but quite the reverse. He could. He could just seriously wound, maybe mortally wound Zionism. Again, we've already seen there is a trend away, especially very much among younger voters, but he could accelerate that trend too,
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Trump can use his chaotic narcissism for good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's possible. I mean, it's very, very true.